our setting is much more immune to cheating. A, because everything was graded really impartially, so it wasn't graded on site, and that was done in a very serious way. And B, no one knew what the threshold was going to be. No one knew they needed an 83 because they didn't know how hard everybody else was studying. So that helped us, I think, a little bit relative to the Colombian health insurance case, where everybody knew exactly what score you needed to qualify. Do you have your hand up? What are people's thoughts on that? And sort of what is there may be multiple interpretations of that, but yeah, Jay.
The person said the 99% of life has experience proportionally less or more benefit. But I'm wondering, is there no way to integrate the area of the line from like the 85th to the 100th percentile, see how that changes before and after to get a sense of like what that proportionality is? Does that make sense?
Say it again. I didn't get the last. I got your first point, but not the second point.
So maybe a simple way. If you look at the graph before and say that the person at the 85th percentile is very qualified, and the person at the 99th, there's a 10-point difference.
Yeah.
Can you look at what the point difference is in the after comparison to get a sense of?
We basically need a counterfactual, right? And we can do exactly what you're saying. I'm going to go a little out of order to what I was going to do in a few slides. Let me just say, because it's basically your intuition, and then I'll explain why I think it applies in the case I'll talk about, but not this case, which is, you're talking about, imagine the following. So this is the same axis we've had so far. This is the 2001 test, and then this is 2005 to 7 schooling. Okay? And this is something we'll look at. This is the threshold, right? Let's let this be the relationship in the control schools. So now we're bringing in data we haven't been talking about. We've only been talking about the treatment schools before. Near winners and near losers in the treatment school. This is the control school distribution, or relationship. Now in the treatment schools, let's say it looks like this, and this is our sort of RD estimate there. The difference between these two is the total effect of the program. Now, in terms of integrating between two curves, or what you're getting at, like, okay, this difference is the effect of the program combining the incentive effect and winning. Or that's one way to think about it, right? So now back to Fernando's point, so how should we think about this effect? There's absolutely no way, based on the data we have, we could rule out that the guys at the top gain the same amount. You could make that claim. What we're finding is inconsistent with that claim. The only issue is we really don't have a counterfactual for that group. We really don't know how much they would have gained. So you can interpret it your way and say, well, maybe they would have all gained, but I only really compare barely winners and barely losers at that one point. And that's what I feel confident about. And everything else is an extrapolation. That, yeah, sure, under a certain functional form, I can impose what that relationship looks like between your test and your outcome. If I impose a certain functional form, sure, I can say, yes, those guys are gaining as well. I just don't know if I believe that functional form. And so I think it's a question of kind of credibility, where we can't rule out your claim, but we can't prove it either. Yeah.
In practice, do people actually have control groups? I feel like one of the advantages for the regression is not is that you don't need a control group, right? It's cheaper to not have it.
It's a huge advantage. I was going to get to that in a couple slides, but let me jump forward to that, which is these are the limitations. And these are really important. We can talk about these a little bit more. But the advantage, that's right, most of the time you don't have the control group in regression discontinuity. You just have like the population, and the treatment control difference is really on both sides of the threshold. So in theory, if there's a government program with a threshold, you get administrative data, you get a cross-section. I mean, that may be all you need, as long as you believe that the assignment was done properly around the threshold. Maybe the only baseline data you have is whatever variable was used for assignment, and then you get your administrative data on follow-up, and you're done. So you wouldn't need the control group, and you don't need to run your own experiment. The policy rule can kind of generate what you need. So that is a potential big advantage. I mean, these downsides, the downside of relying on a rule in terms of real-world government program rules could be point D, though, which is, very often, so in India, there's a below-the-poverty line card that people have. And having a below-the-poverty line card entitles you to a range of services. So if you want to actually say, okay, imagine it gives you access to education and health. And I want to say, wow, what kind of effect did access to the below-the-poverty line have on people's health? Well, did it go through the health intervention, or indirectly through the education intervention, or was it through the food subsidies? I can't really say. There's all these different programs sort of at the threshold. So that's the downside to relying on government programs if there's this clear definition of poverty below which you get lots of programs. So this is a real-world concern. This is definitely a real-world concern, less so in our case, but in many other programs. This is a real-world concern. That's why RD is very popular with administrative data. And we already talked about this, where sure, we just can't it's not credible to extrapolate the treatment effect to another part of the distribution. Was there a hand up? Do you have your hand up? No? Okay. Yeah.
So from that, we had a control group in this study, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of explain the difference between RD and different things, or why would you use a different for this?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. So you're kind of saying, look, why don't we sort of, this gets back to the question before, which is to say, could we just kind of assume that the relationship over here in this part of the distribution with the control group kind of would be similar to the treatment group, and therefore allow us to back out treatment effects higher up, right? So imagine the following. Imagine we just assume that the treatment effect overall for the program is, gamma. So this thing is just shifted up by gamma. Okay? Then could we kind of get treatment effects of winning the scholarship at this whole range, sort of like a diff and diff, if I'm interpreting the question right, there. So could we do this? How can we use the control group better, and why would you feel happy to do that or concerned to do that? Do you have a thought of that? I see you shaking your head vigorously.
Yeah, I still think it's possible to treat this like it is totally effective to time varying those services, right? Which is unique for diff and diff to be effective classes, right? So we just don't know what would happen to these high achieving people. They're like time varying intervals.
Okay, I agree with the issue of sort of heterogeneity. I agree with you, but the way you're phrasing it, I'm not as confident about. So maybe someone can rephrase, or we can come back to you. Yeah.
I'm not going to.
That's okay. We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that.
Well, you're going to have conversions at the top, assuming you have to do something control grading test and solution grading test. You can't more than 1%. So
I see. Oh, so that's even another issue, which is maybe there's some truncation at the top, so we can't even differentiate outcomes at the top. That's a different issue, but could be important in the right tail of the distribution. I want to come back to this point. The time varying issue I'm less concerned about because these were experimentally divided groups. So we could say, look, their time patterns should be similar. But the point where you may have a concern is that whether gamma is the same at different parts of the distribution. So if we think there's heterogeneous effects of the program at different parts of the distribution, then maybe this is gamma 1 and this is gamma 2, and there's really no way for us to distinguish between how much of this gap is gamma 2 versus our A1 estimate before. And so we have this combined effect. Anytime there's heterogeneous treatment effects, we basically have two potentially heterogeneous treatment effects. The incentive, which gives us gamma, and winning the scholarship, which gives us A1. Those are both heterogeneous. They may not be the same here at the threshold as they are way up here. So it becomes hard to, we can make assumptions on them, but it's hard to separate them out. Yeah. Yeah. That's basically my answer to his point, but the sort of concern would have to do with heterogeneity and saying, if we want to assume gamma is the same everywhere, then we can back out A1. Or we could assume A1 is the same everywhere and back out gamma 2. But we can't do both at the same time without making some assumptions. Does that make sense? Maybe that's the clearest way to say it. Yeah.
So I presented the assumption is that the heterogeneous impacts across the inverse of the data. What if you wrap out your data and it looks like its impacts are heterogeneous, and you rapidly go back in there? Once you see that pattern, then go back and say, like, oh, because the way it's structured, it looks like heterogeneous impact. The same way that you do like a parallel Redis test, you look at it and you're like, oh, this looks.
Potentially. I mean, I think it depends on how much we want to extrapolate from, say, the heterogeneous treatment effects in the immediate test score. So let me put it in a little bit of a different way. In the treatment schools, an incentive was offered. That changed behavior in a bunch of ways. We talked about that. Teachers, parents, kids, study habits, whatever. And changed behavior in ways that's hard for us to measure. So it actually becomes pretty hard to understand what the effect of those changes are going to be on long-term school attainment. And that's kind of what we need to do to understand what gamma 2 is. So I think there's sort of a problem with inference in this case where it's sort of like having multiple thresholds. These guys at the top are being hit by 2 treatments. Maybe each treatment has a different effect on its own. Maybe they interact in a certain way, they combine in a certain way. Maybe having study lock as the incentive when combined with more money has more than an additive effect. I mean, it becomes very hard to distinguish what these 2 effects are. So I think that's the sort of limitation of bringing the control group in this particular design. This is a design you don't often see, but we have. This is a combination RCT-RD design, and it poses issues. And we've thought about ways of using it, but we've kind of run into this issue of interpretation. Okay, I've got 10 minutes or maybe 5 minutes, so let me just keep going here and get to some of the GSP impacts. What I want to do in the last 5 minutes, and then we'll wrap up and we'll get to Lucas and BT next time, is just give you the quick taste of what the long-term impacts were of this program. When I talk about that, I'm going to be comparing T versus C here. And I'm not going to try to distinguish between the incentive versus the incentive and winnings, just saying, what's the effect of this program? We know being in a treatment school led to higher test scores and also more attainment because of winning, et cetera. What's the combined effect of those 2 things in the treatment school versus the control school? What do we find? We find a couple things. One thing that we do is we go back to these schools a number of years later, 5 years later, or we go back to these kids, and we retested them. So in the survey, we administered a test. So the first question was, we saw in the short run that treatment school folks had higher test scores. That's what we were talking about last time, in Busia. Do they have a test score gain that persists over time? And the answer actually is yes. So the test score gain 5 years later, this was surprising to us, is about 0.2 standard deviations. That's a little bit less than the average gain in Busia at the end of the competition year, which was 0.25 or 0.28, or depending on the specification. So it fell a little bit, which you might expect, but it remained high. So this is actually pretty important evidence for us. People were making the very kind of thoughtful comment before that maybe there was a test score gain in the short run just because people focused more on the day of the test, or they crammed for the test, or something like that. 5 years later, we test them, they're still doing better. Yeah. More people are in school. So that could be part of it, but they're still better able to read and write, and you're thinking of it as a test preparation effect or something like that?
Well, you're in school, you're practicing the kind of skills you need to do well in the test, and you've been homemade for the last 5 years, you are.
Yeah, that's right. So how much of that is like a real skill gain that we want to capture, and how much of it is a test practice effect we can't separate out. So that's a fair enough point. So there's a gain of about 0.21 standard deviation. So there's a shift up in the distribution. What else do we find? We basically look at political and social attitudes as well. And part of the motivation in looking at these outcomes is the literature within political science and within political economy, trying to understand the effect of education on society broadly. And there's a lot of theorizing that's gone on to try to understand whether more educated people, say, are more pro-democracy, are more educated people more active politically and civically, are more educated people more empowered and willing to challenge authority, or actually are more educated people more likely to basically be co-opted by authority and sort of be compliant with the rules. So there were 3 different sets of theories. And again, it's a bummer I don't have my slides, so I have everything written out here. There were 3 main sets of theories that we identified, or literatures that we identified as being important here. One of them is what's called the modernization perspective or modernization theory. So this is a view that sounds very patronizing and is, was developed in the 60s by mainly US social scientists saying, look, when poor countries develop, they develop in so many different ways at the same time. And we can think of all of these changes as part of the process of becoming modern. And what they really meant was becoming like us in the US. That's basically what modernization theory was. So they're going to become more egalitarian, more pro-democratic. They're going to have more sort of less biased gender attitudes, et cetera. That was the view. But being pro-democracy was seen as a big part of this view. So that's the modernization perspective. There was a second perspective, which was education could actually reinforce patterns of authority. So imagine that in school, in addition to learning skills that give you opportunities that make you feel like you're sort of invested in the status quo, in addition to that, you're also taught history and civics lessons that legitimize the current political and social order. So you become educated, and then you think, look, educated people think our Constitution is great. Educated people think our system of government is number one. So maybe education reinforces authority. And the third view is maybe education actually empowers people to challenge authority. So that was the third perspective. And there's whole literatures and lots of theorizing around all of these. The part about challenging authority we thought of on 2 levels. One would be sort of at a political or civic level, but the other one with our all-female sample very much had to do with challenging authority, traditional authority within the household, within marriage. In other words, are the women who are more educated stating attitudes that are more supportive of female autonomy, female control over marriage, fertility, and other very important life choices. So the empowerment kind of comes potentially on 2 different levels. So these are the 3, and we have one more clicker question, and we're going to wrap up.